Have you ever noticed how silence can speak louder than words? How two people, once connected by emotion and conversation, can suddenly fall quiet, and in that quiet, everything that was hidden begins to surface. When a dismissive avoidant and you both go silent, it isn't just distance, it's a mirror that reflects love, fear, ego, and truth all at once. When both a dismissive avoidant and you fall into silence, what unfolds is far more than a lack of words. It becomes a psychological mirror, reflecting everything that has been left unspoken, denied, or repressed between you. The silence is not empty, it is heavy, dense with meaning, carrying the echo of every suppressed thought and feeling. In that stillness, the unconscious begins to speak in ways louder than words ever could. The absence of communication starts to reveal the emotional blueprint of both people involved. The avoidant retreats into quiet not because they have nothing to say, but because silence offers control, safety, and distance from emotional vulnerability. For them, speaking from the heart feels like walking into a battlefield unarmed. Their silence becomes a shield, a psychological wall built from years of conditioning that taught them closeness means danger, that expressing need equals weakness, and that love, if it hurts, must be kept at bay. But what happens when you, the one who usually reaches out, decides to go silent too? The energy shifts. The mirror forms. Two people now stand in a void where neither will bridge the distance. In this void, truth begins to surface. Not the truth of what you wanted the relationship to be, but of what it truly is. Silence becomes an X-ray for emotional reality. Every unspoken fear, every longing, every hidden insecurity starts to reflect back at you. What you see there depends on how willing you are to face your own shadow. Many times, we mistake the avoidant silence as cruelty or indifference, when in reality, it is a manifestation of their deepest fear, the fear of losing autonomy, of being consumed by emotion, of not being enough. Yet when both sides withdraw, their defense mechanisms become exposed in raw clarity. The silence stretches, and what was once a pause becomes a space of revelation. You begin to notice how much of your peace depended on their validation, how much of your self-worth was entangled in their response. Their silence hurts because it forces you to meet yourself, to confront the loneliness that was already within you before they even came along. And on their side, though they may appear composed, their stillness is often a battle between longing and fear. They wonder if reaching out would mean surrendering control, if breaking the silence would invite emotional chaos. The mirror of silence shows both of you that the relationship has always been a dance of distance and pursuit, of fear and desire. The beauty and tragedy of this moment lie in its honesty. Silence cannot be manipulated. It reveals what talking often hides. Words can disguise insecurity with logic, dress pain as strength, or wrap fear in reason. But silence strips all that away. It leaves only what is real, the tension, the longing, the emotional truth you've both avoided. When neither speaks, the bond is tested not by conflict, but by emptiness. The question arises, can connection survive when there is no communication, or was communication the only illusion of closeness? As the silence deepens, some will feel it as peace, others as torment. The avoidant may finally feel calm, free from pressure. You may feel exposed, longing for closure or reassurance. Yet beneath these surface reactions, the unconscious is at work. The silence is not passive, it is active, reshaping how you perceive love and self-worth. It forces both individuals to confront the parts of themselves that communication allowed them to avoid. In this mirror, you see not only each other's wounds, but your own reflection staring back, asking who you become when love goes quiet. and what remains when the noise fades away. Inside the world of a dismissive avoidant, silence is not merely an absence of speech, it is a strategy for survival. It is the emotional equivalent of retreating into a fortified castle, where the walls are built from years of experiences that taught them love is unreliable, that closeness leads to pain, and that independence is the only form of safety. To understand what happens when a dismissive avoidant goes silent, you must look beneath the surface of their calm detachment. On the outside, they appear composed, self-sufficient, and unaffected, but internally, their silence hides a deep tension between longing for connection and fearing what it demands. Their emotional system is wired to equate intimacy with loss of control, so they pull back when closeness feels too intense, using distance to restore a sense of stability. The dismissive avoidant grew up in an environment where emotional needs were often ignored, minimized, or even shamed. They learned early that showing vulnerability brought disappointment or rejection. Over time, this formed an internal rule: I can only rely on myself. This belief crystallizes into an emotional pattern where they downplay their feelings and suppress attachment needs. When silence enters a relationship, they do not experience it as emptiness in the way others might. Instead, they feel it as relief, a return to equilibrium. Silence offers them control, space, and a chance to regulate overwhelming emotions that intimacy has triggered. It becomes their language of safety, the only way they know how to manage love without feeling consumed by it. When both you and the avoidant fall into silence, it activates their core defense mechanism: emotional deactivation. They may rationalize the situation, convincing themselves that the connection was never that important, that they are better off alone, or that you are the one being unreasonable. These are not lies, but protective narratives their psyche constructs to shield them from emotional pain. They do not know how to express need without feeling weak, so they retreat into silence instead. This silence is their version of control in a world where emotional exposure feels like surrender. However, the silence is not peaceful inside them. It is a quiet storm. Beneath the composed exterior lies a buried longing, a desire for closeness they cannot easily admit. They may check your messages but not reply, replay conversations in their mind, or look at your last interaction trying to justify their withdrawal. It is not that they do not care. It is that caring threatens their sense of safety. Love, for them, feels like a test of endurance, something that could swallow their identity if they let it in too deeply. Their silence is their shield against emotional chaos, but it also becomes their prison, isolating them from the very warmth they secretly crave. In the quiet, their mind becomes analytical, turning emotions into logic, affection into assessment. They think about what went wrong, who was at fault, and how they can prevent such vulnerability again. Their self-protective nature translates feelings into thoughts because thinking is safer than feeling. And yet, beneath all this intellectualization, there is often a pulse of pain they cannot name. Silence becomes a coping mechanism, not a resolution. It gives them space to breathe, but it also reinforces their belief that connection leads to conflict, and solitude ensures safety. To those who love them, this silence can feel cruel, even dismissive, but it is born from deep conditioning, not malice. The dismissive avoidant is not trying to punish. They are trying to survive emotional intensity that overwhelms their nervous system. Their silence is a message, though they do not consciously intend it to be one. It says, I cannot handle this closeness right now. Yet in protecting themselves from pain, they also cut off the possibility of healing. The same silence that brings them control also keeps them alone. It is the paradox of the avoidant heart. the yearning for love hidden behind the fear of being seen. When you, the partner of a dismissive avoidant, go silent too, something profound begins to unfold within you. It is no longer about what they are doing or not doing. The focus turns inward. The moment you stop reaching out, stop trying to fix, explain, or reconnect, the noise of the relationship fades and the sound of your own thoughts becomes louder. Their silence no longer overshadows yours. It amplifies your inner world. What begins as a reaction to their withdrawal becomes an invitation to meet the parts of yourself that were always waiting for acknowledgement. You start to feel the discomfort that used to be masked by the effort to keep the connection alive. It is a confrontation with the self, one that reveals how much of your emotional balance was tied to someone else's response. As days of silence pass, questions begin to echo in your mind, questions not about them, but about you. What are you really seeking when you reach out? Is it love, or is it the validation that comes from being chosen, acknowledged, or needed? Their silence becomes a mirror reflecting your own attachment wounds, your need for reassurance, and your fear of being forgotten. For many, silence from an avoidant triggers a deep, primal anxiety, the same ache that surfaces when someone feels unseen or abandoned. But now that you are silent too, that anxiety has no external outlet. It cannot be soothed by their return or their words. It must be faced within. The stillness becomes an emotional landscape where you meet your shadow, where the illusion of control dissolves, and your true longing stands exposed. This is where the dynamic between the two of you transforms. When the avoidant goes silent, they retreat for safety. When you go silent, it can either be an act of power or an act of pain. If it comes from resentment or a desire to manipulate, it deepens the cycle of emotional disconnection. But if it comes from awareness, a conscious choice to stop chasing, to observe, and to understand, it becomes healing. In that space, you start to notice your patterns, the ways you've equated love with pursuit, attention with worth, and silence with rejection. The stillness teaches you how much energy you've given to trying to decode someone else, instead of understanding yourself. Inside this shared silence, your nervous system begins to recalibrate. The absence of constant emotional pursuit allows you to feel your own heartbeat again, to reconnect with yourself instead of with their absence. You begin to realize that your urge to break the silence was never truly about communication. It was about soothing the pain of uncertainty. Silence now becomes a test of your emotional endurance, showing you whether your love was based on mutual growth or on fear of loss. The avoidant may interpret your quiet as disinterest, but for you, it becomes a moment of awakening. You start to see that you cannot save someone who is not ready to meet you halfway, and that chasing emotional closeness from a distance is a form of self-abandonment. This silence also reveals how your own attachment style operates. If you are anxious or deeply empathetic, silence feels unnatural, even suffocating. It forces you to confront the emptiness that you've tried to fill with connection. Yet in this discomfort lies transformation. You begin to ask what it would mean to love without clinging, to care without losing yourself, to stay connected without needing constant reassurance. The silence teaches emotional self-reliance in a way that words never could. As the quiet continues, it becomes less about waiting for them to return and more about returning to yourself. You may find a strange peace in it, a sense of power that comes from no longer needing their response to validate your worth. This does not mean detachment in a cold sense, but a balanced awareness that love cannot thrive where one person constantly reaches and the other constantly retreats. The silence between you, though painful, becomes the crucible in which emotional independence is forged. It is here, in this mutual stillness, that you begin to understand that the real relationship was never only between you and them. It was also between you and the parts of yourself that love has awakened, challenged, and ultimately set free. When both you and the dismissive avoidant fall into silence, a subtle turning point begins to form. The absence of words, of explanation or pleading, becomes the stage where truth finally starts to emerge. It is no longer about who is right or wrong, who cares more, or who walked away first. The silence transforms from a cold standoff into a crucible, an unseen space where emotions either harden into finality or soften into understanding. The outcome depends not on the passing of time, but on the depth of awareness that grows in its place. When two people stop speaking, the energy that once flowed outward into arguments, reassurance, or avoidance now begins to turn inward. Both are left to sit with what the connection truly meant and what it has revealed about themselves. For the dismissive avoidant, the silence may initially feel like a victory. It restores their sense of control, the space they crave when emotions become overwhelming. They tell themselves that things are calmer this way, that solitude is peace. But as time stretches, the quiet begins to echo. In those echoes, small realizations surface. They begin to remember moments of warmth, gestures of care, laughter shared in fleeting vulnerability. These memories, once buried under their defensive logic, now whisper reminders of what was lost in their need for distance, yet even then reaching out feels dangerous to them. The silence tests their comfort zone. It shows them the price of emotional self-protection. What once felt like safety slowly begins to feel like isolation, and the illusion of control starts to crumble under the weight of emptiness. On the other side, you experience silence differently. At first, it hurts. A deep, raw ache that feels like rejection. But as the stillness deepens, clarity begins to grow. You start to see that reaching out repeatedly was not love, but fear in disguise, the fear of being invisible, of not mattering. In silence, you learn to stop performing emotional labor that was never yours to carry. You begin to understand that love cannot be sustained by one person's constant effort. Slowly, you reclaim your energy from the chase, the longing, the waiting. You stop romanticizing their absence and start seeing it for what it is, a reflection of their emotional limits, not a measure of your worth. The turning point between you both is subtle but powerful. If the silence becomes a weapon, used to manipulate or punish, it destroys connection entirely. But if it becomes a period of reflection, it opens the door to transformation. It is in this stillness that both individuals are forced to confront their own patterns. The avoidant must face their fear of intimacy and question whether distance has truly brought peace. You must confront your own attachment to pain, your need to be chosen by someone who cannot fully choose themselves. When awareness replaces reaction, the silence stops being a wall and starts being a window. Through that window, each begins to see the other not as an enemy, but as a mirror of their own unresolved wounds. Some connections end here. The silence exposes incompatibility so clearly that there is no return, but others find a quiet rebirth. When either side begins to awaken to their patterns, a new form of connection can emerge, one not built on pursuit and avoidance, but on awareness and acceptance. Whether reunion or release follows, both are outcomes of growth. The silence strips away the illusions that once held the bond together and leaves only truth behind. It reveals whether love between you was rooted in fear or in freedom. And once that truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The silence then becomes not an ending but a moment of reckoning, a sacred pause between who you were and who you are about to become. When silence stretches long enough between you and a dismissive avoidant, something begins to shift beneath the surface. A quiet alchemy takes place. What at first felt like distance and confusion slowly transforms into a deeper form of awareness. This is the stage where revelation begins. The silence is no longer just a void or a punishment. It becomes a teacher. It starts revealing truths that neither words nor arguments could ever express. In the stillness, you begin to hear what was always hidden beneath the noise, the unspoken needs, the unacknowledged pain, and the real essence of the bond you shared. The space between you becomes a container for truth, for introspection, and for transformation. For the avoidant, this stillness is both a sanctuary and a confrontation. It offers them relief at first, a retreat into their comfort zone, away from emotional exposure. But as the quiet deepens, the same space that protected them begins to confront them. They start to feel the subtle ache of absence, not necessarily of you at first, but of connection itself. They realize that independence feels different when no one is waiting on the other side of silence. Their mind begins to wander to moments they once dismissed as insignificant: your laughter, your concern, your presence. They may not yet name it as longing, but the silence starts to awaken something they have long kept buried: the need for genuine emotional closeness. And though their instinct is to suppress it, the truth quietly persists within them, whispering that solitude without understanding is not peace. It is avoidance dressed as calm. For you, the revelation through stillness follows a different path. At first, silence feels unbearable. It triggers the parts of you that crave closure, explanation, and reassurance. You may replay conversations, wonder what you could have done differently, or wait for their return. But then something begins to shift inside you too. The longer the silence lasts, the more you realize that it is forcing you to stand alone, to find stability within yourself. You begin to see that your healing cannot come from their words or their return. It must come from your own acceptance. The stillness becomes a mirror reflecting your own strength, your capacity to endure, and your ability to love without losing yourself. What once felt like rejection transforms into revelation. You start to see that peace is not found in their presence, but in your ability to remain whole, even in their absence. The silence becomes a shared initiation, though neither of you may recognize it as such. It tests the authenticity of the connection. It asks whether love between you was built on attachment or awareness, on fear or freedom. If the bond was fragile, built only on the need to soothe wounds, the silence dissolves it. But if there was something real beneath the defenses, the stillness gives it space to evolve. Sometimes the avoidant, through the stillness, realizes that withdrawal has cost them something irreplaceable. They may return, not because of fear of loss, but because the silence has made them face what they truly feel. Other times, the revelation leads to separation, but even that carries growth. The lesson becomes clear. Silence is not emptiness. It is transformation disguised as absence. In that quiet, both people are given the rare opportunity to awaken to themselves. For the avoidant, it is the first glimpse of how distance can no longer protect them from their own emotional hunger. For you, it is the moment of reclaiming your emotional sovereignty, of realizing you can love deeply without losing your center. Whether the silence ends in reconnection or release, both paths lead to truth. Stillness becomes the alchemical fire that burns away illusions, leaving behind only what is real. Two souls, stripped of pretense, each seeing themselves and each other with a clarity that words could never achieve. When both you and the dismissive avoidant fall into silence, what unfolds is not merely the ending of communication, it is the beginning of revelation. The stillness that once felt unbearable becomes a space of transformation, where both souls confront what words could never heal. For the avoidant, silence reveals that emotional distance offers safety, but not peace, control, but not connection. For you, it uncovers the strength to love without losing yourself, to wait without chasing, and to release without resentment. The silence tests the bond, strips away illusion, and leaves only truth. Whether that truth leads to reunion or release, both are forms of awakening. Because sometimes love does not grow louder to be understood. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet, teaching both hearts that the real connection begins not in the noise of emotion, but in the calm that follows when both finally learn to listen.